Great to welcome a guy who's written really a fascinating book about baseball, but a lot more than that as well. Kind of talks about an era in American history that was quite turbulent, but it is a baseball book as well. It's called The Year of the Pitcher. Bob Gibson, Denny McLain, and the end of baseball's golden age. We're joined today by Sridhar Pappu on the telephone. And Sridhar, great to talk with you. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have a chance to chat with you. I just got the book yesterday, so I'm about halfway through it, but I'm enjoying it. And now I didn't get a chance to see either of these two pitchers. We're talking about Bob Gibson and Denny McLain. I saw a little bit of Bob Gibson as a kid, and Denny a little bit when he was with the second incarnation of the Senators. So I didn't get to see their golden age of their season, but boy, did they have a great year in 1968, huh?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, obviously two phenomenal years that will never be matched. I mean, Gibson was 1.12 ERA, and then, people have debated the importance of wins, but no one's ever going to touch 31 wins ever again.
And now I know you're probably a little bit younger than I am, so you didn't get to see these pitchers live back then either. What kind of drew you to this particular era of baseball?
Well, I mean, I think it's a combination of being a student of American history and looking back at 1968, which is arguably the most tumultuous year of our country's time.
Right.
And then also when you think about how you become a baseball fan, you sort of learn the game's history almost by osmosis. And then when it came time to write a baseball book and to write about a particular period, 1968, and Gibson and McLain just popped up because, as a fan who has picked up history, those names, those numbers, they're just with you.
Of course, Bob Gibson, a black man, and of course Denny McLain, a white man, so you had that racial thing going on, not between those two particular men, but I mean going on in the country at that time, obviously, in the 60s, so that kind of added a little bit to what was going on. Of course, you mentioned 68, you had the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and a very tumultuous year politically, of course, the election that year, and you also had what was going on with Apollo 8 and all that, so it was I remember it as a little kid, a little bit, but it was quite a year, wasn't it?
It was a phenomenal year, and as you said, a very tumultuous year. I mean, I think one of the big struggles for me was to sort of separate everything that was going on from the baseball, or, I mean, I should put this in a better way, to look at events and decide what to talk about in relation to baseball. Because, I mean, very early on, I realized that if I were to try and write about everything, baseball and not only the assassinations, but the political race that had nothing to do with the game necessarily, or the aspects of which had nothing to do with the game, I would end up with a half-good baseball book and a half-good history book. So that when I deal with the Kennedy assassination and the aftermath, which I really think played into the burgeoning players movement led by Marvin Miller, or I talk about the King assassination and the racial dynamics within baseball, it all goes back to fundamentally the game and what's going on with the game, and a national pastime that I think at times is lost. When you look back at that era and you see a game that in a lot of ways is tone deaf to what is going on in the country, as opposed to other sports, and without the kind of athletes that were, taking part in the Olympic and the Olympic boycott movement that never took place, or someone like Jim Brown, or obviously Ali. Then you begin to sort of ask why, and why baseball was sort of set apart from the rest of the nation, and that was a really big challenge for me, because you feel the need in a year like this to write about everything. And I think sort of winnowing it down was one of the bigger challenges, at least early on.
Yeah, of course, baseball, like you said, the beginning of changes in baseball with Marvin Miller coming in and eventually leading to free agency in the early 70s. And, of course, 68 was the last year that they had just the two leagues, no playoffs. 69 was the first year where they went to the divisional playoffs, so that was a big change. And then they lowered the mound after 68 because of Gibson's, incredible ERA. And I'm not sure as much for Denny McLain's 31 wins, but I know for Bob Gibson's low ERA, after that they decided to lower the mound back to 210 inches at that point. It wasn't 15, they lowered it to 10, right?
Yeah, and I mean, not only that. I mean, if you look across the board, you look at the years that a guy like Louis Tiant had, or Don Drysdale, who I talk about in the book, with his 58 plus scoreless inning streak that wasn't broken until Hershiser's in 1988.
Right.
And I mean, if you think about it, the American League batting champion barely had over a 300 average. So
yeah, Carly Yastrzemski was what, 302, 301, something like that.
Yeah, and so when you think about that and look at the offensive numbers across the board, I think baseball owners were justified in making certain changes to the game, and we have to remember that all of this sort of was the culmination of Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle's great 1961 campaign and Tommy Davis's great 1963 campaign for the Dodgers, and this decision or this observation that offense had taken over baseball, so certain rules were taken in place, and you at a time when these young pitchers were coming of age, and the culmination of this being 1968, and really having an extraordinary year in which pitchers were going to dominate like never before, and really will never dominate like that again.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about both the pitchers, the key characters in the book, if you want to call them characters, but Bob Gibson, who was born in Omaha, and you talk about that in the book. I was wondering, maybe how his family wound up in Omaha originally, because I think, and I didn't realize the history behind that. A lot of industry was in Omaha. A lot of the black people moved from the South to that part of the country at that point. That's how he wound up there, right? His family.
Yeah, I mean, his family was really part of the black migration that went to the meatpacking plants in Omaha, and I mean, you saw similar kinds of things with African American families from Detroit, Chicago, and all these different kinds of northern cities that promised good jobs and away from the South. I mean, the irony is that African Americans did face a level of racism, not quite to the extent or not to the overt level that they did in the South. But I mean, you only have to look at Gibson's brother Josh, who had a master's degree in education and ended up working in one of the packing houses, but who ended up influencing so many different athletes of his era. He had Bob Boozer or just a ton of players in basketball and football and baseball that came out of the northern Omaha neighborhoods and really flourished. And it was because of him, and I kind of feel like there should be a statue to him in Omaha.
And you talk all about in the book about the relationship between Gibson and his catcher, Tim McCarver. McCarver used to live here in Sarasota, and we had several opportunities to talk to him over the years, doing some radio with him. And boy, he tells some great stories about Gibson. He would go out to the mound, and Gibson would look at him and say, "What are you doing out here?" He didn't want anybody to come out and tell him what to do, did he?
No, and of course the famous story is McCarver going out there and sort of going halfway, and Gibson saying why are you trying to tell me how to pitch? The only thing you know about pitching is that you can't hit it. So.
And Gibson, you wouldn't say he was a mean guy, but he was very tough. I mean, he was probably one of the last of the great inside pitchers, right? Brush your back. I mean, he wouldn't headhunt, but he wouldn't shy away from pitching inside.
No, I mean he wouldn't, but I mean to a certain, but I think he gets mislabeled as a headhunter, which I think is definitely unfair.
No, he didn't do that.
No, and he wasn't going to hit you, but he considered this is office, and you don't step into his office space. You don't dive over the plate. You don't do certain things against him, and I think he said use the words keeping him honest, and so he was very effective, especially in that era and under those rules. And really, in 1968, with that ERA, just showed him at his absolute height.
Let's talk a little about Denny McLain, who had a very tumultuous life, to say the least. I mean, you talk about in the book, his association with some unsavory types, even back then, with the toe situation, the toe injury, or the toes injury, I should say. And, of course, he kind of couldn't get out of his own way for a long time, spending some time in jail even after he retired. But a short-lived career, had a great 3 or 4 years, and then arm injuries, and he was out of baseball pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, he was out of baseball by the age of 29. I mean, one of the sad things about Denny is that had he not been under the influence of the medical advice of the era, I think he would have had a much longer and more productive career. I mean, by 1968, this is a man who's literally almost addicted to cortisone and taking shots on a regular basis, and his arm is weakening. And by 1970, and especially 1971, by the time he gets to the Senators, there's nothing left. And so, I mean, you can say a lot of things about Denny, but I think that one of the things you can't say that is that he wasn't tough. And the fact that he was going out there almost in incredible pain, especially toward the end of the 1968 campaign, is sort of a testament, partially to hubris, because he wanted to win those 30 games, because he saw a financial reward at the end of it. But at the same time, he was there, and he would pitch on 2 days rest, and he would do what was needed of him. And so, I mean, despite his many character flaws, and I can say that, was considerable evidence, even back then. He was a great pitcher who should have had a much longer career.
Almost a right-handed American League version of Sandy Koufax, from the pitching aspect, not the off-the-field stuff, but very similar.
Oh, yeah, very much. Well, I mean, actually very much so, because, really, he came from the old Dodger school of throwing, which meant an over-the-top curveball. Right. And that was taught to him by Charlie Dressen, who was the manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers for a number of years. So that when he started throwing that with great effect, he really sort of came into his own. But like Koufax and like so many other pitchers who throw that pitch, that 12-6 curveball, which is really pretty to look at, he would feel the effects, which is often devastating.
Tough on the whole arm, not just the elbow or the shoulder.
And really, which you don't see a lot of these days. I mean, Gibson's best pitch was his slider, and I think that prolonged his career for a number of years and kept him in the game. Dan Musial said that I believe that the slider was one of the best innovations to come out of baseball after the war, and I honestly believe that, having looked at the pitchers who relied on that pitch, the curveball that is, and suffered the consequences.
Yeah, well, we know Mariano Rivera made a nice living on the slider.
Yeah.
The cutter, they call it, but same basic pitch. But of course, it culminated, you talk about in the book, the 68 World Series, which if you go on YouTube, you can see some of those games. There's some of the old TV broadcasts, they're up there, and won the 7 games, and you get to see some great pitchers other than Gibson and McLain as well. You saw Mickey Lolich in there and as well, so it was one of the better World Series ever played, and Cardinals almost got the back-to-back, but the Tigers won it, and they really had been a long time before they were in the World Series, had a one World Series at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it had been, I guess, since 1945 or so.
Sometime, right. During the war years.
Yeah, and so, I mean, the ironic thing is that, this season, by August, both the teams were running away with the pennant, and in the last year of, what's called, the quote-unquote true pennant, so that everyone was looking forward to this Gibson and McLain matchup. And there are 2 matchups against each other. Gibson has this epic game against the Tigers in which he strikes out 17 batters and sets a World Series record. And then in their 4th game, which was a complete mess, McLain is out early, and Gibson again pitches a complete game. But then it was Lolich who wins not only Game 2, but a very strange Game 5, and then Gibson in Game 7, which just tells you, that things don't always go to script.
Yeah, Lolich, he was kind of an unheralded pitcher in a sense. I mean, he lasted a long time. Remember, he kind of finished his career, I believe, with the Mets, if I remember correctly, and a very tough left-handed pitcher, Mickey Lolich. Yeah,
and I think that during 1968, and, there's evidence for this, all the attention that was poured on McLain, whether it be, him being on the cover of Time magazine or Life or being on the Today Show, was really starting to grate at Lolich, who at one point in August was relegated to the bullpen. And, once he found it, And went on to have a very, a longer career than Denny that, ended badly, but, as a lot of baseball careers do. But, for 1968, he was really the pitcher. By mid-September, Johnny Sain, who I talk about a lot in the book, who I consider the best, not only the best pitching coach of his era, but the best pitching coach of all time, John Sain remarked that he was starting to see Lolich become really the best, the pitcher he was in 1967 when he considered him the best pitcher in the American League.
Name of the book is The Year of the Pitcher, Bob Gibson, Denny McLain, and the End of Baseball's Golden Age. I know we could talk for hours in baseball, Stritter, but I'm glad you had a chance to join us today, and really congratulations on the book, and give out a website if you have one. People get more information about it.
Oh, sure. It's Schrieder Pappu. It's SRIDHAR at PAPPU.com. And then, you can find all online retailers there, or you can stop by your neighborhood bookstore.
Great. Schrieder, pleasure talking to you. Thank you for, again, for taking the time. Hopefully we can do it again on your next project. Doesn't have to be baseball. We talk to all authors on different topics, but pleasure talking to you today, and we'll talk to you soon.
You too. Thanks so much.